Cool.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first version of the Business Guild in person, the sofa edition, as we call it. it's kind of a small sofa, but hopefully
It
it's
works.
okay. Yeah. Tareef, I don't know if I actually told you why we're doing this. I just invited you, but
Yes.
yeah. Did I tell you?
Half.
Okay. So let me explain again,
Sure.
and I also explain for these guys.
Okay.
So starting about half a year ago, MAQE decided to build its venture building studio.
Cool.
So we want to unbundle and diversify the organization by promoting internal entrepreneurs who wants to start experimenting with new offerings.
Cool.
And we have a couple of those up and running already. But we've always felt like learning from people like yourself is very good. So the point today is to sort of learn from your experience as an entrepreneur, and also hopefully learn a little bit more about people analytics.
Sure.
Because that's what you're doing. So that's why we're here.
Yep. Learn from my mistakes.
Yeah.
I know you said experience, but I know what you mean.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, but yes, we want to, so we don't have to do the much ourselves.
Exactly.
Let's start with some introductions, and
Sure.
so correct me if I'm getting this wrong now, but born in Bangkok,
Yes.
raised in Kuwait,
Yes.
educated in the US,
Yes.
and then running a company in Thailand.
Yes. 4 out of 4.
Yeah. What happened? Like, how did that come about?
I don't think anything that was like particularly planned out, but yeah, my family's been around. I'm I think 5th generational Thai, so I've been around here for quite a while. My family, my extended family. My father is an architect. He ended up immigrating to Kuwait, of all places, to become an architect. Started his career there, so that's where my family grew up. And then because I went to an American school in Kuwait, I went to study in the US. And then I studied something that I thought would be both challenging and interesting, happened to be more challenging than interesting. So I came back here, tried a bit of that, but didn't really want to go through with it. So I started my first startup when I was 21 and failed spectacularly, and I've been failing
Nice.
spectacularly ever since.
Okay. Well, Happily is not a failure.
No, I hope not. It's number 5 though. It's number 5.
So yeah, exactly. It is number 5.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through the stories of 1, 2, 3, and 4,
Sure.
and like what you learned along the ways, and how you've hopefully now turned Happily into
Sure.
to the thing that will last.
It started off as a very naive 21-year-old who was just very interested in tech, that just wanted to do something in tech. And I studied material science and engineering, so nothing computer science related at all. So I'm like, okay, if I want to do this, I have to learn how to code, I have to learn how to design. I'm very ashamed of what the product looked like looking back, but hey, we released it, and it was a social commerce platform. At that time, it was very, very popular, especially where I was studying in Chicago. Groupon was getting very big. So I'm like, yeah, that looks really cool. It's a tech platform. I could do that here too. It didn't exist in Thailand. By the time I launched the product, about 6 months later, after starting developing it, there were 35 players right in the market.
Oh, wow.
And as a 21-year-old, like, how did that happen? Right? And as we were trying to build that business, it was a team of 3 or 4 of us. We realized this is not a tech company. This is a sales and marketing company, right? It was masking itself as a tech company because it had some tech in it. And I realized this is definitely not what I want to do, right? So I think that was my first kind of punch in the gut from reality about what it was to really build a business and what I was really interested in and what I wasn't. So I think that then I pivoted to something else by understanding on my sales trips, which I really didn't like. I'm not a salesperson, but I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the customers and what they wanted, what they needed, and there was so much dissatisfaction with the Groupon model, right? And I'm like, okay, there must be a better way. So I built that better way, and then realized that didn't work out because there's a lot of reasons. I think for the second startup, it didn't work out because the business model was not sound. It's one of those things back in the day. Is like you build a product and think about monetization later on. Very big mistake, right? You don't do that, right? Unless you can get a lot of VC funding, which was not here in Thailand 10, 12 years ago. So like things like that, you kind of learn like, oh, you have this fantasy of what it could look like. You try to learn from the best. You look at YC, you look at all these. You're like, it works differently here. So you can't just copy paste that model. And I think that was the learning curve that I had to venture myself and I go from one thing to another. So yeah, eventually I got here. Eventually, I am very confident that this is exactly where I'm supposed to be, which is not something that I felt, honestly, in my first few startups. It was a lot of like question marks, waking up every day thinking, is this right? Am I supposed to do this?
Right.
But like now with Happily, and it's not all rainbows and butterflies. Like there are hard days, but then there's no question that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So that feels a lot better. Yeah.
That's amazing. We'll get to Happily in a little bit, but so the first one was we had, let's say here, the Groupon thing we had in Sogo living social.
Exactly.
Here, right? And actually, as a side note, I'm wondering if the VC model not working in Thailand, I wonder if that's changing because we're getting more anyway.
Yeah.
It's another story.
Yeah.
But so that was the first one. The second startup was what?
It was a social discovery. So we went from social commerce to social discovery.
Okay.
So it was kind of like Pinterest, but not really. But it was around that kind of area of being able to, to share things that you discover with other people.
And how long did you stay?
That was about a year, I think, 9 months to a year. We grew that user base to as much as we could, but we realized to be able to monetize, we needed millions of active users. Things like that on that scale. Yeah. And we also realized that scaling regionally was not as, when you're in the US and you want to scale from California to Washington or something like that, it's easy. Right. But that was my first experience about, scaling something like this, the technology, just within the region is hard. And being a B2C startup was, it takes a lot of capital to get going.
Right. Okay, so actually that's a good one because Happily is B2B, right? So the first two B2C.
B2C.
Then we have two more before we get to Happily.
Yeah.
So
after that, what happened was, again, happenstance. One weekend, there was a startup weekend. I don't know if you're familiar with startup weekend. Yeah. They hosted the first one in Bangkok, I think 2011. I happened to go, and we happened to win first place. It's one of those things where you win, you get there, you win some random event, and you think that's validation. You think that's market validation, right? Yeah. So like because
the customers have spoken.
Exactly, and it wasn't. And again, the naive 23-year-old was like, oh, we won first place means that this must be good. Right. Must be a good idea. So we did that. I did that for 18 months, and that was really hard. Right? That was a social TV one where back then it was this idea that when we watch TV together, there's a second screen experience where the first screen is television, the second screen is your phone. Right. So when people watch TV, they're also using their phones at the same time. What can we do to enhance the TV experience because they have the phone in their hands? And that was what we tried to do.
Okay. Right. And how it didn't work out, but like
it didn't work out. Again, the business model problem, right? Because the monetization model was that you're watching a talk show, for example, and you check into it, and you see something on the screen that you want to buy, like, oh, that person's wearing a shirt that I want to get as well. And business model wise, we're like, okay, if we are able to sell this shirt, we can make a fraction of the profits. Yeah. But it didn't work that way because when we went to talk to a producer of a talk show, everybody wanted to cut. Right, the channel wanted to cut, the producers wanted to cut, the stylist who picked out the shirt for that celebrity wanted to cut. The celebrity themselves wanted the biggest cut. They weren't happy with a cut that was equal to anybody else. So by the time we cut, we were left with nothing, right? So it's like that pie wasn't even baked yet. And it was just so many stakeholders wanting so much out of a non-existent business that we couldn't really get going. And as many experiments as we tried to run, it was very hard to experiment in a very traditional kind of industry that wasn't really good at experimenting. So that's again, I learned that I went away from that pretty quickly because the business model just quickly realized it wasn't going to work out. Okay. Yeah.
And then that led to number 4.
Yeah, number 4 was
reliving memories.
Yeah, no, seriously, I'll need therapy after this. The fourth one was an instant messaging startup. Back then, I was working with my teams, and we were using Skype, and I think maybe even Line to talk. And it was Slack didn't exist at that point. They're like, let's build something for workplaces where you could communicate and exchange messages in a way that was more secure and felt a lot easier than using Skype or something like that. So that's what we built. And kind of, I guess, the similar story as Slack, right? Slack didn't start off as a messaging platform. It was a game, I think, a gaming outfit. So yeah, we did that. And so we produced instant messaging app. And again, a few months later, right, all these big players entered the market. And like being an app here in Thailand doesn't, we're still competing with Slack. It's not like, oh, because there's no geographical advantage from being a Thai, instant messaging app.
Right.
So then that was a very uphill battle. We eventually sold that startup to a enterprise company who wanted to have that as a layer of their technology stack.
Okay.
So that was at least return for our investors. So that felt a bit better. It didn't feel like an utter failure where we went to zero, but it was still not what I really. That wasn't the I didn't envision that it would not go as far as it did.
Right. Interesting. I know I have a positive outcome of the fourth one.
Yeah.
What was your state of mind at that point?
Not great.
Okay.
Like now I could see it as a positive outcome, but when you were there and it's not what you expected to be the outcome, like when that sale happened, it wasn't that I wanted it to happen, but it was kind of like I knew that it was the realistic me beat out the optimistic me.
Yeah.
And you don't ever, like when you're doing a startup, you don't want your optimistic self to ever lose like a debate. Your optimism should always like push you forward. And I think that when I read that, like now I appreciate what happened, but at that point it didn't seem like a victory. It seemed like another defeat, and that it hurt.
And from in terms of timeline now, so you started the first one happened at 21, and then now we're up to what?
I'm probably 25, 26 years old at this point. So this is 2015.
How do you know when to pivot? Like is the writings on the wall, or like because that stuff must be hard, right?
I think it is hard, but maybe that's something that's fortunate of like doing something in Thailand where if you don't have traction, you don't have traction by mistake. I've talked to my fellow like friends who do startups in the US, and they have this problem because they get traction. The market is so big and there's enough early adopters who would use your platform that you're kind of stuck in this like purgatory. Like we have users, but here like you don't have users at all. Like you don't get a customer at all. You don't get a customer by accident. So for me, like that instant messaging startup, for example, was a B2B startup. So the fact that we had like we were 18 months in, but we only had 3 customers. We're like, yeah, this is not good. So pivoting was easy in that it wasn't like there was no. It wasn't a hard decision at that point, I don't think.
So pivoting is I should have done this at the other order. So pivoting it's at the end, right? But what about finding and committing to the original idea? And this goes for Happily too. Like what like how do you know that this is what I want to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe I'm good at falling in love with ideas and problems, and I think each one was just identifying a problem that I really, really enjoyed studying, like deeply, more than anybody else would. The social TV one, I'm an avid TV watcher, so I'm like, yeah, I could do this. I know more about TV than your 99% of other people. So then that's how I got into it. With instant messaging, it was just a very personal problem that, hey, I talked to a lot of people. They all felt the same way, but they didn't feel as strongly as I did that it was broken. So I'm like, okay, let me be the one who fixes this. And by that time, I had built a team that was capable to build that technology. So that was not a barrier at all. So it was more about identifying a problem that I was passionate about solving. And I think that your passion will be tested over time. When you have the idea and you want to solve it, that's the easy part. But as soon as your first challenges hit you, that's when you'll really understand how passionate you really are. Right? How many punches can you survive, right? In the many rounds that you'll face.
Okay. Well, including Happily now, so 5. Are you the single founder, or
I was the single founder for all of them except for one.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of them I had a co-founder as well.
Any learning there?
Yeah, a co-founder is definitely not a light decision. I think that the ability to disagree openly is very important. I think it was. I mean, I don't want to. I don't know how to put it lightly, but I mean, it just didn't work out, right? And I think that was one of the reasons why that startup, the Chatterbox startup, didn't really go as far as it could have. Was because there was a lot of just disagreement on the vision, and myself included. I think I had too much of an ego to say that, it was my idea, so I get to direct where this should go, and that was definitely not how it should. That's not how decisions should be made. So a lot of fault from my side. But again, as a 25-year-old, I wish I did things differently. But
Sure.
hindsight.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit like getting married, right? But not a little bit. It's a lot like getting married. So I can imagine. From my experience, it's been having Andrew. It's been tremendously helpful. Someone, a shoulder to cry on over the years.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
And I can't really. I can't really imagine going at it alone.
That's my biggest regret. Doing a startup by myself. 100%.
But you got married along the way, I presume?
Yeah, so I got married as I was doing Happily with a person I was working. Like, we were working together, and we were both we spent so much time working together on Happily that we might as well get married. Exactly. So that's what happened.
Okay. So Happily got founded at what point?
Happily got founded actually when I was at MIT. So after 4 startups that didn't really go well for me, I just said I needed a break. But I also wanted a productive break where I said, my biggest challenge was that as an engineer, I'm good at building products. I had my confidence there that I could build good products. My problem was selling. My problem was getting it to a global stage and being able to, acquire customers and do all of that. And so I'm like, okay, business school is where I want to go, but I want to go to a more engineering-oriented one. And that's why I was lucky enough to go to MIT so I could get those both worlds in the same time. And so that's when I went to grad school, and that's when I stumbled across people analytics, and that's what inspired Happily.
Okay. So what is the sort of the elevator pitch for Happily?
A tough one. I should be better at this.
the sales and marketing part.
Right? After all this time, the elevator pitch is that we want to make workplaces happier and healthier, and they're just for the most part they're just not. Right? And then we find that these problems are actually more behavioral problems than anything else. They're behavioral mindset problems, and that's where we could apply data and behavioral science to solve them, and that's what we do at Happily. Right? And then we've evolved quite a bit. We started off measuring things really well, and we found that just by measuring things doesn't really solve a problem. So we've gone from not only measuring things really well, but also nudging positive actions in the workplace, and that is what has changed and moved the needle, and that's the impact that we're able to create.
Good insight. I think we're probably at MAQE learning that we're very good at measuring things. Not always as good at following up on it. But you mentioned that the idea came at MIT. So what was it that how did it come about?
Yeah, again, really stumbled across this discipline. I'm like, okay, it's a great intersection of everything that I really like, which is data, human psychology, a lot of design. It was a very scientific approach as well. You're designing experiments, you're collecting data, and the idea of people analytics is taking data about people in the workplace on a longitudinal basis. So not just one data point, but across a time period, and being able to improve your organization based on these findings. So there's a lot of different things that you can do people analytics on. I think that from a workplace area, I think Google does a really good job here. They have a rework program that I really recommend anybody read. I think the first big landmark study that got me really into people analytics was Google's Project Oxygen, I think it was called, and it was this thesis they had at Google that, do we need managers, right? Because everybody's exceptionally talented there. A lot of engineers, and don't managers just add layers of bureaucracy? Why do we even need them? And so they did that. They designed a very disciplined experiment, and very quickly they realized that, wow, managers are really important. right? The high performing teams have really great managers. And I think that led to Project Aristotle, which was trying to understand what are the features of a great manager. And like that I found really interesting, is that they'll take away gut instinct that I think weighs too heavily in management practices, and say, okay, let's bring some data into this equation. And I think that also influenced a lot of the research that I did at MIT as well. And my biggest finding there was the importance of relationships in the workplace. That the common denominator of a person who is great at their job, really creative, great at problem solving, has great well-being at work, that person has strong relationships. And we study it across different types of companies, and like, okay, relationships matter a lot. But then when we go outside of the academics and go into like a practical like workplace, we don't spend enough time at all really paying attention to our relationships. We kind of hope that it happens. We hope that we form these bonds. And I think that in this current climate of not being in the workplace together as often, we can take that for granted, right? And these bonds they weaken, especially when you have newcomers joining your company. They don't have the opportunity to form the bonds that they would have otherwise if you were in person. So I think that we're making a few trade-offs right now and then we should be paying more attention to the relationships that are sacrificed, and how can we design against that.
Have you actually, before I get to this question, in terms of the company now, so it's been operating for a couple of years, 25 people. Some of your customers. Actually, I know our friends at Morphosis is one customer.
Morphosis uses it.
Anyone else?
We have about 60 companies right now, mostly like SMEs. I think that's our sweet spot. And like usually with bigger companies, they will deploy within their digital innovation units. I think those units are the ones that appreciate really tight feedback loops and will actually be very involved in taking action. We find that, I think we work best with a certain nature of organization, an organization that understands the importance of high touch points in communication, things like that.
That's another thing that I think we're learning now too. Like not all customers are alike, and then we fit with some and not the others. The context of my next question. So right now we're sitting in a 650 square meter office, and it's just 4 people here, including us too. So clearly we're very much remote. And actually at MAQE we were very remote before the pandemic too, but it just escalated after that. I like it. I'm a sort of reclusive person in general, so I kind of appreciate it. But I do worry about this thing, about the relationship part, because when you're in the office, Zach and I will go and get water at the same time, and so we'll say hi, right, etc. In the data that you have gathered, have you noticed any differences?
Not in our own, but we've collected, there's other institutions that have done research on this that we definitely use to inform how we do our work as well. But there's ample of information and data out there that talks about the advantages of being in the same physical location. That when we are using chat to talk with each other is more transactional than anything else, and transactional kind of conversations don't form that relationships that will make your work meaningful, right? And it's a very it's a very hard one, because I love working from home as well, completely prefer it, especially when traffic is so bad here. But there's this real question that we have to ask ourselves, like, it's convenient good, right? A lot of the things that we want are convenient. It's like fast food. It's convenient, it tastes really good, but it's not good for you, right? So convenient is not healthy all the time. So we're choosing now, with the whole remote work, we are choosing convenience over the health aspect, because the health aspect is still unclear to us. But a lot of data out there is already telling us that actually, it is, it's clear that relationships help us be healthier at work. And that a lot of the wellness and well-being issues that we're having right now is because we are not as close to our workplace, people at work anymore. And that is worrisome, right?
I'd be curious actually to I mean, I know you don't have data on it, but I would be curious to learn how some companies now, they are forcing people to come back.
Yeah.
Other companies are saying you have to be in the office 2 or 3 days a week.
Yeah.
Other companies like MAQE are saying like you
Yeah.
do what you need to do, and then if you come to the office, great. But I wonder which path is the best. And actually, if we wanted to know, if we wanted to experiment, like could we do that?
I think so. Like in Happily, we have a lot of different companies who have different types of schedules of working from home and not. The ones that actually have the highest employee satisfaction and happiness scores are the ones in hybrid mode, right? And I think I think there's a lot of confounding variables there as well that we need to study further. I think a big thing for me is getting, like, people have to want to come in. Like anybody who feels forced to come in just doesn't work, even if you're on a hybrid model. So it's like, does it make sense for them to say, yeah, I'm going to sacrifice this amount of time each day commuting because I know it's better for me, right? Because if that realization doesn't come about, it's not going to work either, right? So I think it is about that on an individual level. Apart from that forming relationships thing, what other things is available? Malcolm Gladwell, he's a huge advocate for like working together and not working from home. And he has a pretty compelling story. He said that he's an exceptional writer. He said that when early in his career, he got a chance to sit right across like a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. Right? He sat right across. He didn't work together, but he was able to just learn so much just through observation, right? Nuances, and that, by definition, they're nuanced. Like, you can't write about it, you can't read about it. You have to observe it. So in a part of your career where you're working with someone who's exceptional at what they're doing and you want to learn from them, expecting to learn as much through video calls is not going to happen. Right. So there's a lot of trade-offs that we have to start thinking about. Like, is it worth it for us, and how can we make up for that? I think that if we can design a system where we can make up for those losses, then it could work.
And there's no serendipity in the online space. Either you get on a call to talk about a specific issue, but you don't just run into each other.
Yeah.
Looking at your website, it says Happily can help triple the employee engagement score.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you do that? Like, how does Happily do that?
Okay, so it's a very important question that I might want to go, and maybe I could go to a slide here. In any system or any activity that we're trying to run, whether it's a marketing campaign or you're trying to measure sales performance, if you're taking data from a snapshot of time and trying to make decisions based on that snapshot, it doesn't really work very well, right? And that's exactly what we do for people, but we don't do it for anything else. Imagine doing a 3-month marketing campaign, but only measuring something on week 3, and that's it. That doesn't make sense. And so I think that if we realize that it doesn't make sense of how we utilize people data, only then will we realize the failures in how we make decisions because of it, right? Like, my go-to analogy all the time is like, when you're driving a car, you need all the feedback loops that you can have. You need to know how fast you're moving. You need to know how much gas you have left. You have to have turn signals to be able to work with another car on the road to tell them where you're going. And without this feedback loop that we have that's real-time enough, you're driving a car without any sensors whatsoever. And you're checking on how your car is doing again once every 6 months. If that's really the case, you have to drive very slowly in order to not have any accidents. And you have to trust that the person on the road is also driving very slowly as well. Right. And so that's the system that we've built. And it's not, and like, why is that? Why can we measure everything so well and so timely except for people? Well, because it's hardest to measure people. And I think that the ways that we've tried to do it in the past have failed us. And a lot of the analytics that a lot of bigger companies do, which is against my school of thought, is that they'll look through your emails and your calendar, and they'll try to assess your engagement that way. Hey, Andreas has a lot of meetings and sends a lot of emails every day. That means he must be engaged at work. I don't believe that. But I don't believe that the other side is true, where a person who doesn't is not engaged.
Actually, that's a good point. Like, the privacy issue. Like, is the how do you deal with that?
So here, there's the example.
Okay.
I'm gonna fast forward through, but then the whole privacy thing is interesting because there's this company. Have you heard of these guys?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know.
So they are actually spun out of MIT Media Lab. I think they're called Humanize, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, they put sensors instead of employee badges, and they collect everything. How many steps, the heart rate, the breathing rate, who they talk to, how often they go through certain doors and hallways. And with all that data, they were able to uncover a lot of different things. But yeah, super invasive, right? How many companies, how many employees will say, yeah, I'm willing to be tagged like that, just so that you could get better data. But okay, there was this company who did it, and one of the findings that if I remember correctly, they're talking about how they were having problems with relationships in the workplace, that all the teams were very siloed. They were able to build these relationship maps, and they found that each team was just like interacting with themselves. And with innovation, with creativity, it's like, no, we need to be more cohesive. And so they just changed their cafeteria area from round tables to long tables, and that fixed the problem. Because with long tables, you're kind of forced, even if you go to lunch with like 4 people each, you're still connected in some way, whereas a round table, you didn't have that. That's all that took. And they started to see that teams were less siloed. Not perfect, but it's very fascinating that you start using that kind of data to start to see these kind of results. But again, too invasive. Right.
Oh, and we haven't touched on it. You mentioned it, the nudge theory. The whole point that like you don't actually have to make big changes. You do a nudge there, you do a nudge there. You change the tables in the cafeteria, and then you wait, and you see what happens.
That's right.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so stuff like that. I mentioned the calendar thing. I agree with you that it is invasive, and it's one of those things too, and that's what kind of where we went the direction that we did with our the animation isn't working, but we built it like a game so that people would want to interact with it. And our approach is that if we're able to collect information voluntarily from people regularly enough, and at Happily we do it daily, and it's something that employees are voluntarily doing because they're getting something in return, we have a very rich set of information, right?
So because it is voluntary, like if I don't want to engage today, I don't have to engage today.
Exactly.
And you said I get something in return. What do I get?
Well, what we want to tell you is that what you get in return is better relationships, but what you also get in return from asking questions, you collect coins, and you could use these coins to redeem rewards. So there are these short-term incentives that we've built in to say, okay, yeah, I want to do this because I'm getting something, but at the same time, what you start to feel over time is that you form a habit. This now becomes a habit. There's companies who've been using Happily for 5 years now, or 4 years now. We ask them, why are you using it? Nobody says it's because of the coins. People say, yeah, I have better conversations with my teams because of this. I'm able to get feedback in a lot more positive way because of this. But for us, we have to build that habit somehow, and the short-term incentives are a very powerful behavioral science tool to help us do that.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. I want to make sure that we get some questions
sure,
too.
Sure.
Yes, one that's actually pretty relevant to what you just said, Tareef.
Okay.
Different ways of getting feedback from people, measuring.
Yeah.
Indeed, getting people to voluntarily submit information seems like the most comfortable way to get spontaneous and honest information.
Right.
However, assuming you don't have that in place, we at MAQE would resort to having polls and surveys as short as possible, as clear as possible, but eventually with a number of teams polling all of the company or a subset of the company, we can notice as well that some people have some sort of fatigue or getting tired of this. And of course, coercion is not an option. So do you have any experience or best practices regarding the frequency or specific times at which polling people could get better results or just more results?
To add on, one of the things that we struggle with at MAQE, so that, like I said, we're very good at measuring things, but we're so good at measuring things that people get like, oh, another survey, like, come on, really? And which it's either we do Slido at all hands, or we have Poly AI to run polls through Slack, or it's Google Forms. We try to be as creative as possible, but it gets to be too much. Have you had similar issues?
It's tough, right? But I think that at least what I could share, like we do it every day, and we remove the fatigue element from it because it's not about gathering data anymore, right? Feedback is about having a conversation. So we made it so that the question that we ask is the primary goal isn't so that we have data that we can use to analyze something. The primary goal is that we're getting 2 people to talk about something. right? I think yesterday's question was, or today's question, it's Monday, was how do you go out of your way for someone recently, right? That's an empathy building question. And so we're using that as a way to create conversation between two people. It's productive, right? People don't tire of it because it's not the same question that you get every day. But because we're giving them that opportunity, we could also ask other questions that are more, quicker to answer, like how are you feeling today, right? So one of the big things about fatigue happens when there's a feeling of effort. And effort it's like going to the gym once a week versus every day. It's hard to go to the gym once a week because every time you're going, putting on your shoes and getting out of the house, it feels effortful and you're gonna eventually stop doing it. But once it becomes a habit, it's not effortful anymore. You're used to it. You don't feel it. And so the trick then is how do you make it a habit? And for us, when we did our early experiments, when we did it weekly, which most pulse surveys out there do it weekly, we saw it fail. We saw it fail at the 2-3 month mark, even with incentives. People didn't care anymore because it was too exhausting to involve themselves, like remember, oh, it's Friday, okay, I need to do this. But when we did it every day, it just became part of their commute. I'm on the BTS, I'm on my way to work, I'm just gonna spend 1 minute to do this. It's now become a habit. And so I think that's the biggest advice I could provide is that with behavioral science, making something a habit reduces effort significantly. And without effort, the sense of fatigue is gone.
That is, okay, fascinating. Like it's both counterintuitive, but it kind of makes sense at the same time. As an example, we do like our one-to-one schedules here. It's like some people do it every week, some do bi-weekly, some do it by month, and I noticed that again counterintuitively, the more often you do it, the easier it is. Because if you wait for a month, then there's so much stuff that needs to be offloaded, and you sort of have to build up to it. It's like, oh, this is just so important now. I have to use my time with Tareef to like get everything right. Whereas if it's a weekly thing, it's just like, hey, what's up? There's nothing important today. So let's just keep it short.
That's right. And there's so much about people and management practices that are just layers on top of layers on top of layers, right? Oh, we need to talk about performance. Okay, let's add this on every 6 months. Oh, we need to also do this. Okay, let's add this on once a week. Oh yeah, we also need to do, so instead of saying, okay, how can we actually have these conversations all the time? We end up just layering interactions on top of each other so that we make excuses to talk about this thing. And that is when it becomes more exhausting. But you're right. When you're waiting too long to talk about something, the amount you have to unload each time can get overwhelming. Yeah.
Interesting. When I pitched this internally, saying Tareef is going to come in and talk about these things, I said one of the questions was we were going to talk about why compassionate leadership might not be a good thing, because there was a conversation you and I had earlier. So let's dig into that a little bit. Like maybe start. But what do you define as compassionate leadership?
I mean, I think empathy is a function of compassion, right? Like you have to try to understand this other person, and you're also you feel for them, and you're not trying to make a decision that's very cold, and just for the sake of, I don't know, the business or whatever it is, but you're feeling for their pain, and you genuinely want to help them out. For me, like that's a very big part of leadership, and I think what separates great leaders from your mediocre leaders. And I think in that conversation that we had together, from my own personal experience, I felt that compassion did get in the way of effective leadership a lot of the time. And if I had to be very honest with myself, it was because it was easier for me to be compassionate at that point, because I'm comfortable with being compassionate, than it was for me to be clear. I forgot who it was. Is it Brene Brown or Amy Edmondson that says like clear is kind?
Yeah, actually it was. Yeah, I got that in an email today saying being clear is to be kind. Yeah.
And I read that, whatever it was, 9 months ago, and I started to become a lot more comfortable with being clear now. Because I don't think that I'm ever, because I guess have this inclination, I'm not really overly concerned about not being compassionate or empathetic enough. But now I could lean on being clear, and I could see that. I could see that all the mistakes I've made in leadership has been because I lean way too much into compassion. That I actually made the situation worse by deferring the decision 3 months, because I felt that in this 3 months something magical can happen, right, to save the situation. So yeah, it's a hard one. I mean, what do you think about it?
No, no, you're supposed to answer. No, yeah, no, it's super difficult. I guess I come back to this idea of sometimes you need to tell people what they need to hear as opposed to what they want to hear, right? Yeah. And it's hard, especially when you're working with people for a long time, you're friends, and you don't necessarily want to be the bearer of bad news, but it needs to be done, and so I mean, the argument that I guess compassion becomes like, what is compassion then? Well, compassion really is telling you what you need to hear, right? So I guess it's a little bit of a funny way of wording it, but can you imagine a situation where maybe do two, one where you let quote unquote compassion lead you astray, as opposed to maybe an example more recently where you stood fast and you said, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do, you know.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't mind sharing, but I think the prerequisite to that working is trust. Because if you don't have trust in a relationship, being kind can be misinterpreted. Sorry, being clear can be misinterpreted completely, right? It's being cold or. You know. But in my example, I think what happened in the past is that when I brought someone into the team, and I felt that, okay, they're not performing as well as we hope that they would be performing, I would always be extending their time period. Okay, let's extend the probation period another 3 months and see what happens then. And that never really worked out. I've done this about 10 times. I haven't had one case where after 3 months things had changed. And but it was just different. And I could see that in those 3 months, it was not fair on them either, because I was hoping for some magic to happen from their side. And I could see it being very devastating for them, that going in, and those 3 months weren't pleasant for them. No. So that whole compassion about, okay, let's give this another 3 months, I know it was easier for me to do, but what I should have really done was saying, okay, you know what, this doesn't work. Doesn't mean that we're not bad people, it just, this opportunity just wasn't as aligned as we thought it was. Right, and I'm willing to take responsibility for that.
Right, and there's also the compassion to the rest of the team, because if one person is not working out, then the other people might have to pick up the slack, etc.
So that's, I think, the realest example I could share, and now I'm trying to be a lot better at that.
Is that the same thing then to like the whole going back to the US startup world, hire fast, fire fast kind of thing? I've always had a issue with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, I think that's where maybe compassion is lacking. So I definitely think compassion has a role to play. So I think that mentality, where if there are certain cultures that there's a very clear expectation that that's going to happen, like Netflix, I guess the famous Netflix culture, right, of being super high performing. If you're not, you don't make the cut here. If that is very clearly defined in your DNA, it will work until it doesn't work. And I think that's what Netflix learned. It worked for a very long period of time until it didn't work anymore. And maybe the nature of people they bought on board didn't really sync with those core values. But I think that, again, clarity is important there. That if you're going to have that kind of discipline and values, that value system has to be clear to everybody who comes on board to it.
Again, clarity is kindness, right? Yeah. Every company is different. Don't try to be everything. Just know what you stand for and follow suit. Yeah. Okay. Where can, if people want to know more about Happily and you, and where do they find you?
I wasn't prepared for that.
Well, I know you have a website.
I mean, Happily.ai. Yeah. I think we have a blog as well. So if you're interested in people science and the work that we do, and because we work with companies primarily in Thailand, all our research is very Thai-centric, with two Thai workplaces. You could definitely check out our research there. I think that's been, with the data set that we have, I think we have very interesting, compelling research if you're interested in the areas of people analytics.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. I actually, can I
of course.
Because unbeknownst to you, as a thank you. So when we do this business skills, so we we're very appreciative of your time and experience. So there's 3 stacks of books here. There's the org stack, there's the management stack, and there's the innovation stack of books that we think is very good.
Yeah.
You might not like the no rules part now, just given what you just said, but any preferences?
Can you Provide me a recommendation. I trust your judgment.
Well, I mean, I know you, well, it depends. Like the organizational stack. Have you read any of those things? There's Brave New Work by Aaron Dignan. There's Humanocracy by Gary Hamel and Michelle Zanini.
I haven't read any of those. So
Reinventing Organization. Okay, then you should have that.
All right, I'll do that. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. Awesome.
There's more questions. Oh, okay.
So, and I think again, Tareef, thanks a lot. And your experience might be the best experience to answer this one, because you've gone pretty global in your team structure and in your experience. The language barrier when you're polling, getting information from people.
Yeah.
Do you have any best practices for that? Like, for example, we at MAQE have 95% Thai people. Fairly open and speaking English well, but would you recommend polling or talking in Thai rather than English?
We've had to do that actually with Happily. When we ask questions, we ask it in the language of preference for the person reading it. But they also know then, for example, if they're better at Thai, but when they send feedback, it would go to their, for example, the direct manager who cannot read Thai, then they will type and answer in English. But the comprehension of the question is very important, right? I think that should not be underestimated, is that your quality of your answer is only as good as the quality in which they comprehend the question. So yeah, the extra effort it takes to have two different versions so that you can actually get people to really fully understand the question. I've seen so many times a person just misunderstanding a question, or like a group of people that misunderstand it, sends a certain result, and then a team just makes decisions based on those wrong results. It happens all the time, right? Especially like when you have, when your questions are a lot more elaborate, right? When it's like a Likert scale, like on a scale of 1 to 5, and they're like, oh, why did people answer 2 out of 5? Oh, they misunderstood the question. Right. They actually they flip this. I guess like weird things happen. So yeah, I definitely would advise.
And so what I'm hearing too, and correct me if I'm wrong, but so people would have to write in other language of their preference, English for example, but they're also more likely to engage in that if they at least have a better understanding from a native language at the start, right?
Yes.
Okay.
100%.
100%.
So that might be a learning for us to be more.
We want to push people to share the same language or languages, but at least get them to engage more with multi-language set of questions.
I mean, from my point of view, I could read Thai as well, but it's pretty bad. So like, as soon as I get a survey in Thai, it's like, I'm like, oh my god, I don't want to do this. Like, it takes me 10 x the effort that it would take a normal, like a native Thai person.
You know, we consider ourselves to be customer experience people, right? So and when you defer that to experience design and UX, and we all know that a sign up form that is too long, you're not going to do it, you know, and yet we maybe don't exactly always practice what we do.
It's hardest.
Tareef, thank you so much
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
And for everyone who's calling in, thank you for your time, and hope to see you next time.